we can turn the time over to our speaker. So I'm actually going to turn the time over to Ananda Scott, who's going to intro our lovely speaker.
Hey, so I am so excited to have Dr. Kasa here tonight. I cannot tell you how much I respect and admire her. She is one of the people who is really out there doing the work of moving us to a more inclusive society and moving toward inclusive education. Currently, she is the Associate Professor for the Department of Teaching and Learning and the Director of the Office of Inclusive Services in the College of Education at the University of Colorado. A lot of words, but she is in charge of the fully inclusive college experience for people with significant disabilities. She has done work from everything from the individual IEP advocacy level to working with entire school districts to facilitate a shift from a traditional model, more like we have now, to a fully inclusive model. And I'm just very honored that she's willing to give us her time tonight. The topic, I want to address the topic a little bit because it was suggested that this being sort of the time of year when IEPs really get, a lot of IEPs get rewritten with an eye toward fall, that we should have a meeting about that. And there is a lot of discussion and conversation that comes up a lot around things we've learned from COVID and how, you know, a lot was hard this year, but there were good things and there were discoveries about what works for kids and discoveries about things that we can do in schools that we didn't know we could do before. And there's this, I almost want to say anxiety about how do we not just go back? How do we go forward in a new way? And IEPs are a tool to capture some of that and make that happen. And so that's really what we're here to discuss tonight. And with all her expertise in crafting IEPs to drive desired outcomes, I thought Dr. Kasa would be a good person to lead that discussion. So.
Well, thank you so much, Ananda. It's so good to see you. And it's nice to see all your faces. And now that I'm talking, I don't feel tired. So it's great. I'm in Colorado, so it's a little bit later, but you know, I have a lot of energy, so we're good to go. So yeah, this is a new topic for me, as you can imagine. Although I've been involved in discussions with families about, you know, what they've learned over the, you know, being at home with their child and supporting their learning and how that can impact. You know, it's something we're all kind of newly engaging in, is how do we take what we've learned and put it back into the school, into practice, into IEPs, and let it inform the work we do. So I do hope that this can be a discussion. I do hope you interrupt, that you put things in the chat, that you call out, that you problem solve with me here tonight, as this is really designed to be more of a discussion and less of a lecture type of thing. Although I always seem to have a lot to say about things, so I'm not quite sure, you know, we'll see how that goes. So I thought I would open up, and I'll do a lot of sharing and not sharing screens and things like that. I thought I would open up with the question here around, sorry, I've got a million things open that there we go, get to my presenter button. You know, with just this quick brainstorm, like 30 seconds, if you could think of some things that were not working for your child in school pre-COVID, like what would you love to get out of their life? What would you love to have people stop doing that's not working for your kid when they were in school pre-COVID? And then what worked for your child during COVID when they were at home, when you were supporting their learning? So like 30 seconds, if you could just dump your brain real quick. I thought that might be a place for us to start. And I'm going to probably just chat for a sec while you brainstorm here, but I am looking at my clock too. And, you know, Ananda said, you know, the IEP is a tool for us, and it absolutely is. The IEP is imperfect. IEP meetings are imperfect. The implementation of the IEP is certainly difficult and imperfect. And with all that, it is a tool we have where we can take a step towards hopefully getting some practices written down that we might be able to work as a team to implement. So I do think that addressing this question, you know, what do we do with what we've learned during COVID? The IEP is your starting place. Informal meetings can happen, of course, you know, talking with teachers and stuff. But if we want it in a document where we can really learn from what we're doing and have it something that we can share, that we do really want to get that in the IEP. So if your child does not have an IEP in the next couple months and you want some things in it prior to the next school year, call one, ask for one. You can ask for an IEP anytime you want. You all know that. I've worked with folks that have IEPs every week. I'm not saying we should try for that. It's a lot of work. However, you're allowed to call for an IEP meeting and say, hey, I've learned some things. Can we get around a table and brainstorm? Can I share with you what I've learned about my child and what supports work for them? So that's a place to start. All right, so I'm going to quickly glance in the chat here. All right, I love this idea that too much support in some areas, not as much support in other areas. So the not working, too much and then not enough in others, for sure. Not giving enough time for kid to process assignments. It's so interesting. This is something for us to be with too, as we're thinking about this. There's such a hurried nature to who we are in this country, and such a nature of no silence and, oh my gosh, we got to get it done, get it done, get it done. Well, I'm doing a lot of work right now on challenging behavior. And so I've been really studying a lot of neuroscience and the work that Ross Green's done and Bruce Perry around trauma. And one of the things that they all recommend is that we build silence into every day, regardless of how kids struggle, that we build some quiet time into every day in our schools. And we do not do that commonly. I'm in schools all over the place. We commonly don't do that. But that speaks to this comment around some quiet time, some downtime. And that's for all kids needing to process, not just disabled students, but all kids needing to process that. So that's something to be thinking about, like, how can that become part of universal design? How can that become part of standard practice? And I also think that's probably a bigger step. So today we're going to talk about IEPs, right? We're going to talk about supplementary aids and services, accommodations, modifications. How do you get that in your IEP? But then what I hope the school might do is say, wait a second, these are some practices that could aid in universal design for our school that will really make our school an accessible building for all students. So that's where we want to take these lessons, is out of the IEP and into bigger practice. So that's something to be thinking about here. All right, so I love this, Ananda, the freedom to interpret assignments in the way that works for your kid. That is very cool, right? So you are being able to implement and really thinking about how to structure it, how to ask the questions, how to dole it out piece by piece, things like that. That's something you've been able to discover, and that's great. Absolutely, if we could get rid of token economies and positive reinforcement, that would be awesome all across the board. All right, working small class size in person, freedom to do assignments and timeline. All right, cool. So these are all great things, and thank you. I appreciate you all putting them in there. Does anyone want to say theirs that didn't put them in the chat? Okay, so then I'm going to take us back, because we're going to kind of use this as a baseline for discussion. So we've got this information here, right? And so if we're thinking about what wasn't working and what was working, now the question is, what do we do with that information, which is the whole point of our discussion here tonight. So I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to go back and forth a little bit. All right, so then there's the question. How do we let schools know what worked at home? How do we ask them to implement these new strategies? How do we share what we know? Oh, sorry for that typo there, for what's not working while in school. So, and again, how do we do all this is through the IEP meeting. And really, you're going to be looking at probably three main areas. One can be goals. You might find some goals that you don't want to have included anymore. You might have ideas for other goals based on your new knowledge from spending so much time at home with your child and watching them or participating alongside them while they're working. So really thinking about how are the current goals? Do I need to make any changes? Do I have new information on that? And always remembering that families are co-equal members in that IEP meeting. So asking for that draft ahead of time, giving your input and crafting those goals together is going to be a really important thing for you to be thinking about. And then the two other areas to be really thinking where these ideas can go, one is in the area of accommodations and modifications. And then the other is in the area in the IEP. I don't know what your IEP document looks like, but there's usually an area for supplementary aids and services. And so those might be the two areas. Now, if there's not a nice area where all of this fits, you can always have something added on. You can have documents, blank papers, all of that. There's no legislation that says an IEP document has to look a certain way. That's why every single school district has a different style of document. And so you can add it on. So, get really creative on how you want to make sure the team knows what we're talking about in this IEP. So what I did is I took a couple of the comments that Ananda sent to me. They don't have anybody's name on it or anything. And I thought we'd work through a couple scenarios together. And then that might get us thinking about other topics that, you all have and how we might do this. So this is, I think this is really helpful that you guys shared these. And so one person said, I assisted my child a lot. How can I show how much help my child needed in case she needs that next year or this spring? And so what I think we want to look at there is, what does that assistance look like? Okay, so you've got to operationalize stuff for an IEP, right? So I assisted my child a lot. What does that look like? Maybe pick the top 3 things that worked well. Put them down. Is it that you gave one piece of information at a time? Is it that you gave written directions? Is it that you had information available in multiple formats? Like she was able to watch a video clip on it, was able to read something on it, was able to see some pictures on it. What was that help? And then you want to get that in the IEP. And so then the strategy is, or, how you do that is then you talk with the team and say, all right, so here's what I found that worked. I needed to first give my child a visual, step 1, step 2, step 3. Then I gave a choice of how the child would get the information. Do they want to read it? Do they want to watch it? Or something like that. And then I gave them a choice of how to do this. And so you want to really get absolutely specific with what that is. And then we write those as kind of access strategies in the IEP. Again, these things can cross boundaries. It can go in accommodations, modifications. It can go in supplementary aids and services. It can go in a note at the end. But you're wanting to get those strategies in, and I really see them as access strategies. So what do I need to do so my child can access the information? And so I'm going to stop here for a second and pause, because I was hoping, kind of thinking through in this way of like, how do we operationalize? How do we come up with the strategies might, lead to some questions, or, lead for you to have some different ways of thinking about things that you want to talk about. So I'm just going to pause a second. All right, I'll keep going. Okay. All right, back to my thing. Okay, so that's one of them that I thought was pretty clear. That first comment around, I helped, what do I do with this information? All right, so here's one that might be a little trickier. My child really benefited from a less distracted environment. How can I ask for that in some capacity? So this idea of less distracting becomes kind of a tricky situation and a hot topic sometimes, because we have an assumption that is not true, by the way, that segregated classrooms are less distracting. And so sometimes when people say they need a less distracting environment, we think, oh, well, we should not do inclusion. We will put them in a pull-out classroom. We will put them in the segregated classroom down the hall. Well, I have to tell you, I have spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours in segregated classrooms, and these are not environments that are without distraction. Okay. And so we've got to remember that. So don't get caught in that first type of assumption that, you know, teachers and people often think, oh, smaller room, less kids, less distracting. No. Do you know what happens? All those adults talk to each other all the time. And the focus isn't often on the learning of the students. The focus is often on what the adults are doing and talking to each other. And it becomes a very distracting environment, I find. So that's my 2 cents from being in those classrooms a lot. And I don't know yours personally, but lots of others. And so what do we want to think about it with the idea of distraction? I think is a really important thing. And I've got a couple ways of thinking about it. Number one, it's really good for kids to build that muscle around being able to tolerate distraction, because that's actually something they're going to need for the rest of their life. Most community jobs, college, being able to get schoolwork done in a library when you're in higher ed, working in labs in high school, all of these things come with distractions. And so we want to do both. We want to respect the child's need for an environment that will support their learning, and we want to build muscles so that they can learn in lots of different environments at the same time. And so I would probably ask, like, all right, are there certain tasks where the child needs less distraction? When is that? Are there times when there's a part of the room that might be a less, distracting part of the room? Are there certain tables or seats or table mates the child could sit with that would be less distracting? If you want less distracting, you don't want to sit next to me because I talk too much. You want to sit next to someone who's quieter. Okay, you want to put me with the chatty people, or maybe not. But you want to really think about seating. So maybe that's a conversation at the IEP meeting. Is there a seating arrangement that would support more focus for my child? Is there a part of the room? I work with some teachers, and when we think about universal design, we want to think about lots of areas to work in the classroom. And so I'll often work with teachers and say, look, can you just have a table at the back of the classroom where if kids don't want to be where they're sitting, they can go and sit there? And it's not stigmatizing. It's not the bad kid desk that you see that's the one kid up in the corner by the teacher. It's a table, okay, where anybody who wants to work there could work there. So could we talk about alternative seating in the classroom? Could we talk about choice of seating in the classroom? And I know that's hard during COVID, and I don't even know if you're all in person. It sounds like you're moving in that way. But when you're back in person and this whole thing is over, you might want to be thinking about that. Like, what can I do within the general education classroom that will reduce distraction? And also there's obviously things like headphones and earplugs and all kinds of things that we could use that might or may or may not be useful for the child. But I think that's a little bit more of a complex discussion about what are we after. We want the student to be able to process, to engage, and we also want them to learn to be in an environment where they can get some stuff done. I've worked with many kids where like little checklists and stuff like that help them, little timers help them to stay on pace. Not a timer like you got to get it done, but like, ooh, am I working? And some kids are motivated and like that. I happen to enjoy those types of things in my own life. But those are you're gonna have to really pay attention to what helps and supports my individual child in order to kind of do that type of thing. Any thoughts, questions as we get into some more of the complex kind of issues that come up with this?
I sort of have more of an observation or a thought, but even though it's really different and more vague, it's kind of exactly the same mental process you were talking about with the first one. We're breaking down what did more time spent actually look like, and breaking down what distraction actually looks like.
Right. I love that. Yeah. And so I think we all have an assumption of what distraction looks like. And so, yeah, what is actually going on here? When do we need, what conditions do we need, that type of thing, under what academic circumstance, all of that. I'm going to apologize ahead of time. My bulldog is in here with me and she's snoring. So if you hear snoring, it is my dog. So I apologize. I was like, really, Lucy, you have to snore right now. But yes, evidently she does. So yeah. So, let's go ahead and we'll do a couple more here and see how we you know, how we think about those too. And then I'll talk to you about a couple strategies from working with the IEP team. All right. I love this one. My kid benefit from the small group at recess. How can we translate that to next year? Oh my gosh, what a cool idea. How do we create small groups at recess, or friendship groups, or community groups, or I want to play handball groups. You guys probably, I don't know if you guys do handball. I'm from California. We did handball in Southern California. But you know, how do we do tetherball? How do we do run around and tag? How do, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, so I think the idea, and I think maybe where this is coming from, is recess can be overwhelming, right? You get out there, there's so many kids. What do I do? Who do I play with? Maybe it's hard for me to ask someone to play. I don't know, everybody gets distracted. But if I have a little group of people that I know I'm connected with, then my recess might be more interactive, fun for me. Recess should be fun. And so the idea is, can we build groups of kids that want to be together for certain activities? And again, I think this could be around friendships. Like, are there kids you want to meet and facilitate friendships with, where kids can opt in and opt out or choose to be in a group? Or are there kids that want to play certain games and we can create, hey, this is, you know, a little group of people who's playing handball. Let's all, you know, can we go over there? But it has to be purposeful. And so I think the answer to this, you said maybe we can't, I think we can. But the thing is, we have to be purposeful about it. You know, facilitating friendships for kids with and without disabilities, you know, sometimes happens very naturally and sometimes it doesn't happen very naturally. I've done a lot of work at the university level and at the elementary middle level, trying to really, you know, break down this idea and the barriers that, you know, disconnect kids. And I think schools, we do a lot where we disconnect kids. And so then we want to start thinking about how can we undo some of those things that keep kids apart and really work to help bring kids together and get to know each other and build relationships. And so it's something you might do. I would never do this just around the disabled kid, but you would want to do this either as a whole school or as a class. You know, your class could have groups of kids where they played certain games together or took on challenges together or decided to you know, create a certain project during recess or something like that they wanted to do. But I think this is a discussion around the IEP team, you know, in the IEP meeting, where you might, you know, really start thinking about, okay, how can we work to create smaller situations? And then you start brainstorming. And so that's going to lead to something I talk about next, which is like, what kind of communication do we have to have during an IEP meeting to get to where we want to be? So yes, to the top one there. All right. The second one is really great too. So this, I'm just moving my little thing around so I can see it. My child's academic skills regress. Schools pushing for more pull time. How can I stop them from decreasing time in gen ed? They're convinced she can benefit from gen ed instruction, core subjects needing one-on-one. Okay, so first of all, almost everyone struggled during COVID. So I don't think we can use regression in skills during COVID as evidence towards more segregation. And I think that has to be very clear and stated very clearly in the IEP meeting. COVID is a very unique time. Lots of kids experienced stress in many different ways. Lots of kids' academic skills went a lot of different places. And this is not a time for us to use that type of evidence to further restrict a child's placement in general education. Clear. So what we need to do is ask newly, what can we do when my child gets back in person to really build up skills, interest, excitement for their learning? Okay. And it's been hard on kids and been hard on families. And so we really want to ask those, asking different questions. But I would ask the IEP team to pause on this situation and give us some time back in person. Okay, give us some time to really implement things. The other thing to really think about is pull out does not equal increased academic skills ever. We have 35 years of research that shows that what does increase students' academic achievement is time in general education. And it's literally just time. So there's all kinds of strategies that are used, but when you boil it down and you really look at what's happening, time in general education equals higher academic achievement in all of the research for the last 30 years. And so we really got to get with the IEP team on the same page around the research. Pulling out is not going to catch kids up, fix kids. That should not even be our goal. It's not going to, give us skills that are then going to generalize back to the classroom. Where kids learn those skills is in the general education classroom, in the naturally occurring environment, right with their general education peers, right with their peers, because they're general education students too. And so really start thinking about that to inform the discussion around any changes in placement right now. That might be if your student had struggles behaviorally, and at home you're not seeing those struggles, but at school you were prior to COVID. Okay, you want to bring those strategies in, but none of that should be evidence for further restricting a placement. Right now, we want to look at what we can do to support the child to reignite, to integrate back into school. So I'm going to just take a second here and pause and look at the chat.
Christy, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about pull out, I think what we're talking about is like a resource room kind of situation, right? Or in our school district, especially in the elementary level, where kiddos might need like some extra help in math or reading. So what you're saying is that by them leaving their classroom for gen ed and going to a resource room where they're getting extra help isn't necessarily, like the research is telling us that isn't the way they're necessarily going to learn as much. Is that what you're?
Correct. Yeah, the research is not there to support that practice at all. So, and it's interesting that we think it's extra help. We actually think that it's going to help catch them up, and there's no evidence to show that. And so really what practice helps, and what I work with schools all over the country to do, is to dismantle their pull-out and segregated systems and to work for co-teaching systems where students, special education teachers and general education teachers are co-teaching in that general education classroom to deliver those special education services. And so then we're looking at access to the general education curriculum, support strategies, technology, all of that type of thing in the general education classroom. And that's where those services go. But yeah, the pull-out models where kids are going down the hall, resource, but I'm also referring to the segregated classrooms. There's a lot of kids who are in segregated classrooms who then go and visit general education classrooms as well. And so both models aren't proven to be what works as far as when we look at achievement, but also a lot of other things like adaptive skills and friendships. And when we get into college, it's all about employment and things like that. And our outcomes are better when we include students with disabilities in the general education classroom. And, I have to tell you, academic outcomes are one thing. I think there are many other reasons why kids should be together, but it's one thing, and it is a thing schools do pay attention to. So that is a piece of it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Jessica.
Hi, I'm the one who had mentioned that the small group at recess was really working for my kiddo.
Nice.
And I just wanted to ask a little bit more about what you had said on these friendship groups. Part of what was difficult for him last year is that the recess was just so chaotic, so many kids just running around, and it was just overwhelming for him. So are you saying maybe there would be predetermined groups that would be playing certain activities, so he would know like what activities were available, and it wouldn't be so chaotic? There would be more structure.
Yeah.
Maybe?
So what does he like to play?
Well, that's a problem. So one thing he likes to play is pirate kitties, and it's a very narrow type of
I bet. What grade is he in?
He is second.
Second grade. There's got to be some other kids in second grade who like pirate kitties because
There
that
are
sounds fun.
In fact, they do, but the problem sometimes what happens is he's so stuck on the one thing, and then the kids decide after a while, you know, we played a lot of pirate kitties.
Right. So I think there's going to be some flexibility to that. You're right. Because maybe the kids don't want to play pirate kitties the whole time. But I do love this idea. And Sarah, I want you to know I'm paying attention to your comment while I'm also answering this, which is, you're right. It shouldn't be all students with disabilities. It shouldn't be all students who have IEPs that are together. So what I'm thinking is in the general ed second grade class, I might sit my class down, whole class, and say, what do you guys like to play at recess time? And brainstorm, and we just write them all down. What are they? What are they? And your son's probably going to say pirate kitties. And then I would be like, oh my gosh, do you guys want to join each other? You know, are there a few people who'd like to play pirate kitties today? All right, cool. Where's my pirate kitty group? All right, you guys go on out. Where's my this group? You guys head on out. So it's really a simple idea. And I can't guarantee in any way it's going to last the entire recess time, but at least it's a starting point, right? You're with these 2 or 3 key people and off you go to Pirate Kitty Land, whatever that is. You guys like Foursquare, off you go to Foursquare. You guys like tag or swings, off you go. And it's a starting point. And then the other piece, and this is really missing in schools, is recess is an incredible time of social, interaction and fun and joy and all of that and movement. And we often don't have training for our people who support recess to teach them how to support that type of interaction at recess. And that might be something to think about. If you have a child who does need some support at recess time, can we get a little training for the people who do support at recess and teach them how can they provide coaching to kids when they get in conflict? How can they provide coaching to kids when I get left by myself and now I'm upset because nobody wants to play Pirate Kitty with me anymore? How do I help transition to maybe everybody wants to play Foursquare and maybe I can try that out today or something like that? And so that might be something for school buildings to think about. Really, for schools to be successfully inclusively, we've got to think the entire staff. And the entire staff really has to be a part of supporting that. So that's what I was kind of thinking about that. When we would kind of create some groupings and stuff. Does that, Jessica, is that kind of, yeah, it's not going to be perfect or, every single day, because recess should be some time of freedom. And some kids struggle with that freedom. And so how do we create some support within that, I think is a good idea. Any other thoughts, questions? All right. So I have something that I was going to share with you guys that, has been somewhat useful. This is one of my very amazing students at the university, Sam Gonzalez, and she gave me permission to use her picture today. She was honored. And so she said she was going to be famous. She is awesome. But, what kind of things can we say at IEP meetings that can help us get to good communication or useful communication? And so this is something that I often talk about when I'm talking about IEP meetings, is asking the group how. And so, how can we make this happen? You can phrase it with your priority at the beginning. Our number one priority is that she remains with her same age peers. How can we make this happen? Let's strategize about how that can happen in the general education classroom. We often get stuck on whether it can or cannot happen. Is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? Instead of really getting engaged in creative thought. Creative thought is what we need for inclusion. Creative thought is what we need to support the learning of all kids. And so really thinking about what's the how that's missing when we get stuck in yes or no, will we or won't we? Ooh, we can't do that recess thing. That would be too complex. Well, let's reframe it. How can we make that happen? My child needs to be surrounded by other children who can model those skills. How can we really, get that as a part of their day, that kind of thing. So that's just, something quick, easy to think about. I know IEPs can be incredibly stressful, especially for families. And so, any little, things we can do to try to keep this focused on creative problem solving with the team might lead you in the direction of getting some of those strategies, that you're looking for implemented. So I'm just pausing a sec to see if anybody. All right. So the last thing I'm going to share with you guys, I think we're close to time, but I'm going to share this real quick with you guys prior to us kind of going to an open conversation, is this idea that there's a lot of myths that exist in the world of special education. And that might be something that might be coming up as you enter into the new school year with new ideas freshly about how to support your child. And, we want to dispel these myths. So there's a myth around kids have to be able to keep up to be included. No, they don't. We provide modifications and accommodations and supplementary aids and services and differentiated instruction, and disabled kids do not have to keep up in order to be included in the general education classroom. And I'm actually curious if some of you through COVID discovered that your child could actually engage in the curriculum a lot more than anybody thought possible, because you were able to support their learning in a different way. And I love the nodding heads I'm seeing. Absolutely. And so that's what you want to capture. My kid can access that general education content. My kid can participate. They don't have to get everything and they don't have to keep up. But man, can they access it? Can they access some of it? Can they participate in it? Yeah. Absolutely. And so we want to capture that in new IEPs, new versions of IEPs. Okay, the other thing is sometimes you hear gap is too large. You know what? There is no gap that is too large. I will tell you one thing. After I did college inclusion, there is nothing I cannot provide access to or modify to have any child with a disability included in. I can make college physics, chemistry, anatomy, English literature accessible to people with disabilities. And so we know it's not about the child. It is about the barriers we have in classrooms. And that's what we're looking to undo. So part of your work in creating these new IEPs and creating new versions of IEPs is to identify the barriers and look to undo them. So you're going to be thinking, okay, at home, we didn't have this barrier. How can I bring that to the school? Okay, well, how do we get rid of that barrier at the school? And that's what we're looking to do. And I promise you, when you start to do this for your individual child, it impacts everyone else positively as well. There are barriers for students without IEPs, and we can undo those too. So more diversity in how we present content and create classrooms so that they can be accessible for all benefits all students. And that's something you want to remember when you're fighting for your individual child, is that whatever changes you get made in the classroom is going to be beneficial to all students. And that may not be apparent right away, but it is something that is absolutely there. So other thoughts, comments, questions as we get close to our time? All right. Do you hear my dog snoring? It's quite loud. I'm like, man, she can snore.
Do you mind if I ask a question? I apologize for coming in late.
Oh, I love it. Nice.
It is possible you've already answered it. Some of the accommodations that I am trying to get for my child are more effective as general class accommodations rather than individual accommodations. But I'm trying to figure out how to approach that in an IEP meeting. For example, my child struggles with handwriting. So of course, there is a Chromebook available for him to use, but it's to the side and he has to ask for it, and no one else is using a Chromebook and everyone else is handwriting. So he views it as both making him stand out, and also as extra work because he has to go get the Chromebook, he has to log in, he has to figure out how to open up Google Docs, and then the Google Docs not in his own, but in the school's Google Drive, and then share it that way. And it's this whole barrier for that accommodation. So how do I say not only, so it's in his accommodation, he has access to a Chromebook, which theoretically he does, but he's not able to access it because of all those barriers.
And he probably doesn't want to use it because he's stigmatizing, right? And so this is so common, especially as we get into the upper grades and into high school. Man, whatever makes me look different, I do not want any part of. And I hear this over and over and over again, that kids who have accommodations will refuse to use them because it sets them apart. So hard to do in the IEP meeting because the IEP is about your child. So if you've gotten it in there in the IEP meeting, great. However, there's more conversation to have because now my kid's refusing to use it because it's stigmatizing. And so you're going to want to ask the question to the teacher, can you say to students or write up on the board and project it, if you want to handwrite, get your paper pencil. If you want to type, grab your Chromebook. And that's what we're after. And I know Scott's in here, so he's listening to me. So UDL, Scott, this is what you're pushing. Choice in how we do this. So the other thing people get a little bit confused of is we really in school, you know, I love me a good notebook and some paper and pencil. However, everything real I do in the world is on my computer. Typing, everything is word processing on my computer. I sit and doodle and take notes and never look at them again. And I have a bizarrely huge stack of these particular notebooks. And I don't really use them for anything other than that. And so we've got to get that our schools have to respond to how we're going to be working as adults as well. And they're going to be on computers. They're going to be typing. Some people will say, well, Christy, there's research that says handwriting is good for their development and things like that. Yes, normed on kids without disabilities. So no, that does not help our kids with dyslexia. It does not help our kids with learning disabilities. It does not help our students with Down syndrome. It does not help our students with autism. Normed on kids without disabilities. Okay, sure. Yeah, maybe. And at the same time, we know access is going to be typing. They're going to be typing. They're going to be required to type. They're going to have to be able to use a computer. So we want to create that balance in school where kids can have a choice. Do you want to use a computer? Do you want to handwrite? And so that's about UDL. So what I think, Diana, is when it's a conversation about, okay, we've got the accommodation now, how do we get them to use it? And if the teacher is sitting there, can we talk about universal design with the teacher? Can we say, what do you think about giving all kids that option? Some teachers don't even think about it.
But that has been my approach. I mean, that was the exact thing I suggested was, can this be an option? Can anyone who wants to use a Chromebook, not just my child, can, and the paper. But so often the conversations, especially in the IEP meetings, are so individualized. That's the first approach, is the individual accommodation rather than thinking of the classroom accommodation. I guess what I'm asking for is, I know what to ask for. My question is how to frame it so that the answer will most likely be yes.
Yes. I maybe think Scott might answer that question. I mean, you want to get the entire building enrolled in the idea of UDL, and that it will actually benefit all your students. So that is one of the things I want you to start to think about is teachers are typically concerned that all their students do well. If they offer choice and more access to technology, more kids will do well. Your child is not the only one who needs it in that room. And we really do have to step outside of, oh, you two go get your Chromebooks because you've got a disability and you go get them. No, instead, bigger picture. Now, one thing good that's come out of COVID is we typically now have a whole lot more laptops and technology in classrooms. Almost every district I enter right now has got one-to-one because they spent tons of money getting everybody a laptop for COVID. And that may or may not be your district situation, but there seems to be more technology available. And the benefit of that is choice in UDL. And so I would try to get a yes from the teacher in that conversation. If you get a hardcore no, maybe you can ask for a discussion with the teacher and the principal around UDL, around how you can talk about implementing that more in the building and the benefits whole school. Unfortunately, you can't, I'm saying can't, but I'm wondering, I'm not sure you can get that written into the IEP. I haven't actually gone after that anytime ever, I don't think. But I do think it's a discussion worth having, building level, district level, that type of thing.
That was actually what I was wondering. Can I ask, if possible, can these accommodations be made whole classroom accommodations, like the Chromebook?
Yeah, the document is such an individual.
Right.
What you're going to want to do is, I don't think we're going to get that whole. Yeah, but I'd like it if you could. If I can change the law, I'll do it.
Thank you.
All right, speech to text. Nicola, I see this question. Okay, so I've got an easy fix for this. So Nicola asked, what if your student uses speech to text and when a person needs to go in the hall so it's so quiet when so anyways, I think what you're asking is if they need to use speech to text, it's too loud in the classroom. Am I right about that?
Yes, when they were in person, often had to go into, a little glass room in the hallway to actually have it quiet enough.
Yeah.
And even now needs to, mute and miss out on the lesson in order to use it.
Yeah, so I'm getting an example here, but unfortunately it's caught. I was gonna bring out my headphones. Here's my fix. You get those really cheap earbuds and you put the little earbud here and it's got a little microphone right here and the kids sit and talk real quietly into their speech to text. And it's not too loud, because when you're out without the earbud and you don't have a little microphone right here, you have to talk louder for your computer to get it. But if you've got that little microphone, you can kind of just talk quietly into it. And it doesn't bother the classroom, because I promise you, there is not a general education classroom in this country that is silent for any period of time, more than like 2 minutes. And so there's always a little buzz in the classroom. And so just a little talking quietly into the microphone this has worked wonders. So try that. And they're very cheap. And if your child doesn't like the earbud, they can get the ones with the little thing here too. Most kids tend to think the earbud's a little cooler. So
thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
I was going to say one of the great positives in the secondary school classes, so middle school, high school, is a lot of our teachers have moved on to the Canvas platform, right? Yeah. And so they have so much information on the Canvas as far as assignments and modules, and all of those things have been there's so much more, so that if the kiddo needs to refresh themselves, like if they're not processing what's happening in real time, they can go back as a refresher. That is one of the things that I feel like has been a huge silver lining. And that's one of the things I worry will go away, right? That teachers will possibly go back and so I don't know how to assure that doesn't go away, but that has been a huge silver lining. I feel like.
As far as, Kristen, that's a really good point. And I agree with you completely. As far as getting that stuff in the IEP, you can ask to have slideshows available ahead of time. You can ask to have links to videos, to handouts, to things like that, that might encourage the teacher to put that in Canvas so everybody can just use it. And I think now that teachers are in the habit of getting things into Canvas, it will be easier for them to provide that accommodation, but it's absolutely a reasonable accommodation to ask for PowerPoint slideshows, notes, graphic organizers, materials, things like that. So yeah, think about what's needed and ask for it. And then I agree with you. If we can keep that going, that would be awesome. Really good. Jessica, this is a great question. And it's also really hard, so she said some parents are overwhelmed, understandably, by the number of accommodations and the level of individual support that their child might need. And the parent becomes overwhelmed by the amount of work needed to get to that point. And I think the answer to this, so she says, so how can we make it easier for those parents who really, so they don't need to do all this work in isolation? I mean, I think this community is a great place to start because you can support each other. But the other thing is training so that teachers take on the bulk of that work. It's really, and I know teachers work very hard, and you know, and it's a big job being a teacher for sure. And but I think that it's training for teachers so that teachers have the tools that they can then pass on to their families and say, look, I've got ideas. I can help with this. I can support you. We, as teachers, we always need the family's knowledge. Families should be a resource to us. And teachers should also be supporting families and letting them know they can learn more, they can understand, things like that. So it seems like possibly there's some, maybe some need for general education and special education teachers to have some more training and education around best practices for inclusion, accommodations, modifications, things like that. So that way it's not, the burden is not placed entirely on the family, and it shouldn't be. And that training can be written into an IEP. That is part of IDEA, is the districts need to provide training. So good question. Hard one. Good though. All right. So I don't know exactly what time y'all end. I'm happy to hang out, but I also don't want to keep you. I want to respect your evening. And so I'll just pause for a moment and see you guys. Ananda, you can let me know where we are and what comes next.
Typically we stay until about 8:30, but if the questions run out and we've learned everything that we can possibly sponge from you, then you know, of course we'll let you go. I would love to know, one of the things, you know, you had said that something that's said often is that the gap is too big, right? So, you know, I have a middle schooler and I'm like looking long term, right? Like you have college. What I would love, because you work in a college, how are kiddos that need a lot of accommodations, are they like, how are they like treated? Are they treated differently? Because one of the hard things when you have classes that are segregated is that when the kids that aren't in those classes all the time come to visit, then they are visitors, right? And the kids that are in those classes don't necessarily know how to interact with those kids, and the kids that are coming in don't necessarily know how to interact with the general education peers. And we found that a lot when we went from self-contained class to general ed.
Yes.
Like the kids were not ready for my kid.
Yeah.
So what does it look like in, I guess, you know, later on, like in college, because that gap, I can attest, just widens and widens between social norms and, like, you know what I mean? Like, socially, especially.
You know, there's a lot of ways to think about this. Number one, because we have functioned as a country, as a society, through segregating people with disabilities for so long, we have created a division amongst humans that doesn't have to be there. And so the work of inclusion is about bringing people back together, about dismantling stereotypes, dismantling this idea that there is a norm and that there is something other, which is something we have created. It is absolutely a normal part of the human experience to have a disability. And it is, you know, it's something that we all could get or are born with. And we've created this idea that people with disabilities are somehow different, and that disabled people are less than. And that is all not something that just happened. That is something we have done and created. And we continue to do that through segregating students at school. It is stigmatized, it is separate, people don't learn about each other, people aren't naturally, you know, drawn to each other because we've created this. So this is a bigger problem that you're speaking to, right? So part of how we start to dismantle it is by having people together. And in really kind of normal ways, you know, in school, at recess, at lunch, all those types of things in our communities. And that starts to help people get used to being with all different types of people that are around them, to put it very simply. And sometimes, you know, kids are going to say whatever kids say, and they say mean things to each other, whether they're disabled or not. And they say great things to each other, whether they're disabled or not sometimes. And so teachers are going to mediate their communities and build a community of what's okay here and what's not okay here. And so that's a part of what goes on. Certainly, I think a part of how we could mediate this as well from a bigger picture as a district, it might be something you think about, is how do you make sure that disabled lives are represented in your curriculum? Okay, and I paused because that's something really big to think about, because I guarantee you, most schools I'm in, the only way we see disabled lives represented is in some very minor form of recognizing Helen Keller, and not even a really in-depth look at her where it recognizes that she was like a social activist, socialist, radical disability rights person. But we learned that she was a person that was helped by Anne Sullivan. And so we don't really know disability in our curriculum, and disability is a huge part of our history and our lives and should be recognized. Your high schools should be teaching about the eugenics movement. Your high schools should, your middle schools, we should have disabled people represented in such a way that we're celebrating them and learning from them, and that their voices are present, just as we do, as we create a diverse curriculum. Disabled people need to be within that as well. And so if that happens, then as a non-disabled person, I start learning, oh, these are people who contribute to my world. This is a part of what it means to be human. This is a part of what, we can do. And so that's, again, a bigger picture look, disability represented in your curriculum. Other thing is universal design takes away a lot of that, because if I'm saying as a teacher, I'm responsible for making sure every single person in my classroom learns, that's what I'm going to engage myself in. And that's really what I'm doing. I'm thinking about, I don't think, oh, here's my curriculum and I'm going to change it for this one kid. What I do is I think about, how can all my students learn, even if there's a giant gap. Of course, there's whatever this gap is around skill too, right? So maybe I'm in 11th grade and I read at a second grade level. All right, no big deal actually, because we have digital copies of everything and you can listen to that. Somebody can read to you, the teacher reads, all these, there's so many ways to access things. I could watch a YouTube video about it rather than read it. I can have picture representation. There's so many different ways to access this, this learning. The other thing is that, socially, kids really do learn from their peers. So the more time students with disabilities spend in general education, the more they learn from their peers, and their peers learn from them. And so now we're in a reciprocal relationship around, how do we act as 13-year-olds in this bizarre world of, growing up and things like that. The college students that I work with all have some sort of intellectual disability label. You would say there's a very large gap. And I promise you, while some of them have visible disabilities, some of them have disabilities you cannot recognize. And they really are doing a great job of getting the curriculum, big ideas, participating with their peers, doing all of the things that sometimes I wish 19 and 20-year-olds wouldn't do, but they do anyways. So very much lots of typical experiences that are happening. So while I know there is a skill level gap on what kids can do and people do, what I find is the more we're together, the more we look like a community of people that are together. And so that's something I find that the gap kind of goes away in lots of ways. And then we just engage in access strategies. How are we accessing that type of thing? So yeah, I think it's a big question that you asked, and I love it. And unfortunately, there's not like a really simple, easy answer, but it's a lot of work for us to do. Yeah. One thing you might start thinking about as schools, and so I guess I'm talking to your administrators a little bit, is how can you get teachers interested in this idea of representing disabled lives in your curriculum? You know, and not from a pity base. We shouldn't have Autism Awareness Month and all this stuff where that's the only thing we do. You know, do it if you do it, fine, but that's not the only thing we should be doing. You know, we should be learning from people with autism. Their voices should be present as powerful leaders and people that are accomplished and people we are learning from. Yeah, Ananda.
I was just going to say, just while we're on this subject, Office of Education Ombuds in the state of Washington has created a curriculum for this subject
Love it.
for elementary school level. It's I can't remember the exact target grade it was written for, but it's also meant to be very easily adaptable for that kind of full elementary range.
Yeah, nice. Nice. I love that. That's great. And we got to continue to grow and develop that and get people interested in it and all of that. It's there's so much good out there for us to be listening to and learning from. Ananda, yes.
I haven't seen it used in
Okay.
in our schools. So it's out there, it's a tool, it's a thing that we could be, it's on their website, it's a thing we could be sharing with our kids' teachers
Mhm.
and for administrators here. It's a tool that's out there.
Cool. Ani, if I've mispronounced your name, I apologize. I'm going to go back to a slide that I think will answer your question about a little bit of resistance. It's not a perfect answer, but I do think it might be something that we can talk about. And so, okay, so it's around this idea of how, so you get it in the IEP, but you've got a teacher that's resistant. How do you learn what's happening? Okay, because that's what I find. I can get a beautiful IEP written and then no one's going to implement it because they don't want to, or they don't think the child should have that. They agreed about it in the IEP, but they don't really think the child should have it. So this idea of learning what's happening, these are the questions I ask families to engage in if they feel like that implementation's not happening or there's a resistance to it. So asking about, you need documentation around how much time my child is spending with peers without disabilities. How many hours, minutes a day is my child included? Is my child ever removed? If so, why? Where do they go when they're taken out of the classroom? Where does my child eat lunch and with who? Can you show me the data taken on the amount of time my child's removed from the classroom? You can tell this is a hot topic that happens. But this one, Ani, I think might be more related to what you were asking about. Who's making the, and this, it says modifications, who's making the accommodations or modifications? Can you send me some pictures of the completed work? Can you send me some pictures of how that's going, or document how that's going, how the accommodation is being implemented? How is the assistive technology being used? Who's making sure it's ready? Who's making sure the computer program's loaded, the document has been scanned in so they can listen to it? Who's making sure my child knows how to use word prediction, things like that? So unfortunately, if you've got someone resistant, part of, I mean, obviously we want to try to get people excited and enrolled in this. And as excited as I get, I promise you, there are a lot of people who don't like my ideas. And so, you know, what we have to do then is really think about, how can we try to hold them accountable to what we did as a team agree upon in the IEP? And so to me, that's about documentation. And it's about sending it home. Yeah, anyways, do you have any other question? I saw you kind of move, Ani. Oh,
well, I guess the question is like, because there's the IEP team and there's some gen ed teachers do participate in, but not all of them. So the teacher who's kind of supposed to implement it is not part of the IEP meeting. So it's not like,
what grade?
He's provided the IEP. It's 10th grade.
10th grade, right. So you might request specifically that teacher can come to the IEP meeting, or you could, if they can't make the IEP meeting, maybe have a meeting with the administrator and a teacher outside of the IEP meeting to just talk about that implementation.
Because it seems like the IEP is written and then, you know, we don't know who the teachers are, and then, you know, we get the new teachers, and it's, I mean, most of the teachers are great, but occasionally, you know, I just run into a teacher who's like, you know, and how do you address the issue? It's like, they're so busy. They got, you know, 32 students in the class and they cannot spend so much time on one individual student.
Well, your child, okay, so a couple things. Number one, yes, teachers are busy, and sometimes teachers don't understand the IEP. So an extra meeting to go over the IEP, what it means for that specific teacher's class, actually might be very helpful to that teacher. They might think, oh my gosh, I don't even know what this means. But if you sit down and go, oh, here's what they need in biology, and line it out for them, that might be very helpful. The other thing is your child has a case manager.
Right.
Okay, so that case manager's job is really to be this conduit in between the IEP, the family, and the general education teacher. So you might need to chat with the case manager about how can we support, and there's that how question again, right? How can we support the biology teacher to implement these accommodations? I think they might be very helpful. Now, I have to tell you, I know none of this is your job, and you shouldn't have to spend the time doing it, but it might work in effort of collaboration, you know, to do an extra meeting or two as a way to support, you know, the child, you know, the teacher to learn about the child's IEP. I mean, so that's where that would be my starting point.
Okay. Okay, well, yeah, it's because, you know, like there was one specific teacher, I mean, he just felt resentful, like putting extra time in. So I just didn't even want to deal with him.
I don't blame you. That's when I try to remind teachers that when they sign up to be a public school teacher, they're agreeing to educate the public, and not just the few children they happen to like. They have to actually provide an education to all of the children who come in their door. So, you know, I get really direct sometimes, and I know that's not your role, and something you might possibly do. But yeah, sometimes teachers need a little nudge, like, oh no, part of your job is to implement the IEP. So,
okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a good question over here about general strategies, practices about UDL, things that every classroom should be doing. So what I guess I'd like to do with that, Jessica, is if I put together some resources for you and send them to Ananda, can you get them out to the group? Okay, good. Yeah, so I'll do that. I've got some already gathered, but I do have some things that are just general practices that can be useful, and I'll send them out, and then she'll distribute them.
Thank you so much, Christy, for coming. I have gotten several messages about how much I think that your messaging has been appreciated tonight. So we just really, really appreciate you being here. So let me go ahead. Is there any last final thought that you had for us, Christy? Like,
oh, I don't know. You know what? You guys got this. You know, I don't know. You guys, this is hard work. It's hard work for the district, and many times it's hard work for families. It's hard work for the students that you all love and care for and parent. And it's also work that's incredibly important and exciting. And so I would just, you know, I think you all are in a hard position sometimes. You're going into schools, it's vulnerable, it's hard, it's your child, it's emotional. And I just guess, I think I'm glad you have each other in this community. Continue to lean on each other, help each other, and provide support to each other as you go into the school and ask for new things on the IEP and new practices to be done, and continue to collaborate. I love that your administrators are on here and that they're listening, and continue to collaborate with them and you know, and have people continue to learn. So thank you for all that you're doing. My hope is that someday we end segregation for kids with disabilities all over the place. And so I really appreciate everything you're doing to have your students learn and participate alongside, you know, all kids. So thanks so much for having me. It's been great to see you all this evening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna, oh yeah, see, so many clapping hands. It's delightful.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna go ahead and put on that screen that I'm gonna share my screen one last time that has the password or the Can you guys see that? So that's our meeting ID and password for the meeting after the meeting. So I hope to see some of you guys there. We're using the same Zoom. So probably when we end this meeting, give us 5 minutes and then we'll open up the next meeting. But I really appreciate everyone being here. I'm so excited about the next executive board. And I really appreciate everyone that showed up and voted. So we couldn't do it without our members. We love our members. So, all right. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Okay, guys, I'm going to end this and then let's meet over at the next meeting. I can't hear you, Colleen. Okay, all right. See you in 5 minutes. I hope to see you all. Okay.